Now would like to invite the first speaker of the day, Ms. Shinjini Kumar. For the session, Reputation from the Lens of a Business Leader. Shinjini is the co-founder of the mysaltapp, which is a fintech platform for women aimed to make the world of finance a little more equitable. Shinjini has over 3 decades of experience in senior positions across fields like fintech, banks, and consulting. Shinjini was country business manager for the consumer bank at Citibank India for over 3 years. She has occupied senior leadership positions across Indian financial services, including as CEO of Paytm Payments Bank, banking and capital markets leader at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and country compliance officer for Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Shinjini also has a unique career trajectory, having occupied important positions at the Reserve Bank of India, where she handled foreign direct investments, currency management, and supervision of banks and non-bank finance companies. Joining her on stage for a Q&A session after her keynote address will be Munavar Attari, MD of FleishmanHillard, India.
Thank you so much. Good morning.
Good morning.
I am really privileged and honored to be here. As a startup founder, one of the things that you wish for is if you find an adjacent market serendipitously. And speaking at a PR conference for me is that adjacency, because this is not my core area, and this is not what I have done for a living, even though, like you just said, I have done many jobs. So thank you, Amit, for having that trust in me. Amit and I are Twitter friends, and it speaks about the world in which we live, the friendships that we make, the reputation that we create through things that we do on an everyday basis. I know one of you is going to go home with a 10,000 rupee prize because you would have made the maximum tweets today. But when you are tweeting, you're also putting yourself out there to show the person that you are. So best of luck with everything that you're going to go through in this conference. And so far, everything I've seen is very impressive. And this is your first conference, and I'm the first speaker. So I'm really, really privileged and honored to be here. I wish this conference a really glorious future. I have a vested interest in it. But now you've made me a party to this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to really keep the presentation type of activity very short. And I'm going to actually enjoy my conversation with Munavar. One of the principles in my life is I started my career as a 22-year-old at the Reserve Bank of India. And all the advice I ever got was to look more serious, be more serious, have a more serious haircut, wear a more serious attire. And at some stage, I just felt like I needed to have more fun. So my goal in life always is to have more fun. So I want to enjoy my conversation with Munavar, and I want all of you to have fun while you are listening to me and while you are asking me questions. So I'm just going to go through like a very few slides that I have here. I understand you are PR professionals. All of your knowledge and understanding of what reputation means is greater than mine. I acknowledge that humbly. But still, what I'm going to tell you about is like from an industry leader's lens, given that I have done all these different things, what have I learned, or how have I learned it? Sometimes at personal expense, sometimes because there are people who are wise enough to hand you down some wisdom, and sometimes because you wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning and suddenly you get this fear that, oh my God, if this blows up, it's not going to be good. And then you go and, go into the office and start containing it. So all of that is a combination of how I have learned, and I'm just going to share a little bit. Very slyly, I've made all of you aware of my brand in the meanwhile. So there we are. That crystal that you're seeing rotating is a combination of 7 crystals of salt. The reason we called our company Salt is primarily many reasons, but 3 of them. One is because salt is an essential commodity in your life and in your food, but it cannot become the main course of your life. And we want money to be a source of enjoyment and fun for everybody and a part of their life, but not the main course in their life. Also, because we were building for women, we feel like women's work is like salt. It's essential, but it's undervalued. And SALT has always stood for protest, and we felt like closing gender equity, gender gap in finance was our form of protest. So that was not what I had intended to share, but because I saw the logo, it reminded me. I thought you might be curious. I hope you're curious, because curiosity is very important to everything in life. So let's move with the presentation. So this is the first time I heard this sentence, okay? I must have been a young person in my 20s, maybe 30s. But it really baffled me, because I had come from a village, and I felt very privileged to just, be one of the few people who studied in a, small school, small college, and suddenly found myself having a good job and everything. And I was like, why do I not want to see my name on the front page of the newspaper? Of course I want to see my name on the front page of the newspaper. And then I learned this, that front pages of newspapers are very happy to carry bad news. Have you ever read about like somebody done like an amazing job of training 10,000, bringing 12,000 rivers back to life? How many people here have heard of Rajinder Singh? One person there. I also see the gray hair on you, so good, thank you. Anybody else? Nobody else, right? Because you didn't see him on the front page of the newspaper. You can catch up with me later and I'll tell you, or with her, to know who that person is. But that's the person who actually brought 12,000 rivers back to life, even before the rest of the world was crying about climate change and sustainability. You didn't see him on the front page of the newspaper, that's why you don't know about him. But how many people don't know about any of these people who are on this? Is there anybody who hasn't heard of Enron? I mean, you guys are young, it's not fair for me to ask this question, but is there anybody here who hasn't heard of Enron? It'll be interesting to know. You haven't heard of Enron? You have heard of Enron? Yeah, I would think you have heard of Enron. Is there anybody who has not heard of Enron? You're PR professionals. I'm just curious. No hands. Nobody has the courage to say, no, I never heard of Enron. There you are. I know that women are courageous. So you should go back and Google Enron, okay? Because everybody who grew up around the time when Enron happened knows about Enron. How many people haven't heard of Arthur Andersen? It was one of the world's largest companies before it failed because of the reputational damage, not because of, of course, what they did, because they failed in their audit, but Enron took them down with them. So, FIFA, basically, I'm just going to move, because what comes on the front page of the newspaper, what your TV anchors are shouting about all the time is usually bad news. So you don't want to be on the front page of the newspaper, because most likely it will be for something that will not be good. So think about that. This was the other one that you heard then, which is a little bit contradictory to what you heard, and then this is a little bit more modern, that no publicity is bad publicity. And primarily you heard this from, the show business, the media, because they just can get around doing funny things, get into a brawl, and actually everybody gets to know, oh, this person is actually, because the media will always say actor or actress or TV anchor or something like that. So that makes you realize, oh, I didn't even know this person existed, but now I know that this person is a TV anchor just because they got into a brawl. So that created this understanding that no publicity is bad publicity, at least people get to know about you, they get to know about it. Having said that, all of you are PR professionals, you know that doesn't work for brands. You do not want all publicity to work for you, because it doesn't. So you have to constantly think, as a business leader, you always have to consistently think about that trade-off between brand awareness and brand character. There may not always be a trade-off. You may be lucky that every awareness that you create goes towards the character that you want to build, but sometimes there may be a trade-off. So one is, this is what I learned. 32 years of financial services, very hard learning, but being boring and predictable versus exciting and unpredictable. You have to choose the ride sometimes. And sometimes, of course you can, I'm going to give you the next one on this. Sometimes you can be lucky and smart and talented and in the right place at the right time to be a little bit edgy, and it works for your brand, like, hello sexy. But you could just go tip over to the other side someday and get into the other side of it. So just be aware of what is helping you to build, but what could tip you over that's what I learned. This is my biggest lesson. I, of course, came from the regulator. And when I was within the regulator, I found it suffocating sometimes because I felt like there were too many restrictions, not just on us, but also on our regulated entities, on everything that you did, right? It's almost like working in the judicial system, that you don't want to engage too much with your regulated entities, multiple things that you want to be careful about. But having stepped out of there, and having worked in the industry now in different capacities, in different leadership roles, this is definitely the biggest lesson that I have. And for any of you who works not just with financial services industry, I'll come to other examples, this is a very important thing. Regulation, having a regulatory license gives you the brand value, gives you the trust with your consumer, and any dent on that can significantly damage your brand and your personal brand. So this is something that I learned through my journey. This is also something I learned through my journey, that when it comes to legal battles or when it comes to tax matters, they're not treated the same way as regulatory restrictions for some reason, because you could actually be seen. I think everybody doesn't like tax authorities. My brother is a tax authority, so we always have this banter. So if you have a large tax demand, it's not always necessary that people will hate you because you had a large tax demand. I mean, there are people who think taxes go towards nation building, and if you're a corporation and you're not paying tax, but that's like not everybody, so you still can. So you need to understand the nuances of what damages you how to be able to react to it and to be able to manage it, right? And this one is very important. So I'm just going to spend like a little bit time on this, and maybe Munavar, when we speak about it, then we can talk about it more. But there's a whole range of other things. So these are relatively clear and understandable, legal, tax, regulatory, you can still understand. But this whole range of things that come up, right? You know, things like just poor taste, like the Myntra logo, right? Just poor taste, not something that you can pin on a person and say you violated this law, right? Breach of acceptable norms on sustainability, gender, accessibility, and this range is becoming wider and wider. And you're all young people. You are the future of reputation management. You are the future of PR. This is what will become like a big source for you guys. For us, we haven't seen as much of it. We have seen it play out in the last few years, and we are all students. We are all learning about it. We are all learning how to deal with it. Sometimes it feels like, oh my God, it's so unnecessary, but actually this will become very, very important. Like, what did you say or do about, gender or any kind of a slight that you had on disability or anything, that can come back to haunt you really big time. What's happening with Twitter, right? Oh, that's my next slide. So community health, for example, can be a very major, so what happened with Johnson & Johnson, right? That was a community health issue. You can't be giving people and babies carcinogenic products and expect to get away with it, right? The last one, which is about creative accounting or fraud, I want you to think about this, because this is another thing that I've learned from my experience, that when you have an actual incident, like a trader did a fat finger mistake and you lost like a lot of client money, it's a huge problem and it's a huge reputational loss as well. But you have steps to take in that situation. You'll fire the trader, you'll pay the penalties, you'll go through that, you'll manage it one after the other. But, or similarly for any kind of a creative. But when you have things like what happened at Wirecard, how many people saw the Netflix documentary on Wirecard? I think it's on Netflix or Amazon Prime. Okay, you and I need to become friends anyway. One more hand I saw. Anybody else? Okay, see it. Not now. Now we'll talk, but when you want to. It's a very interesting film. I don't want to get into describing it. It's a real story. I know this because Citi sold, I feel like a little bit part of it, because when I joined Citi, Citi globally had sold its acquiring business to Wirecard, and we were working on that transaction, so we had a little bit of interaction with them. I also had a little bit of interaction with them when I was in consulting, because one of my clients had done a deal with them and gotten money from them. And when I was watching that film, I was thinking, was this founder aware of everything that was happening under his nose, or was he not? Because what was happening under his nose was not a fat finger error or a trader hiding trading book losses, which you can think that maybe a founder didn't, maybe the CEO didn't realize. But here was this guy who hired a COO who was very smart, very dashing, and his whole lifestyle consisted of dealing with Russian mafia and just living way beyond his means, showing extraordinary profits with no. You have to watch the film to understand what kind of damage can be caused to you because you are not aware of what's happening. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he was aware. Maybe he was complicit. Nobody really knows. That's not what the film tells you. But you have to understand that reputational loss will come to you from people that may be part of your organization, that may be very close to you. It may be happening right under your nose. You may not be able to see it. How do you become aware of that? Those are the type of things that I think I learned both by my own experience and by observing what was happening. This is, just give me a second. So, because I work in a startup now, this is my latest learning. When is it too early for you to start thinking about reputation of your brand? And the answer is never. It's never too early. You have to start thinking about it from day one. You have to start thinking about it before you incorporate the company. What do you stand for? What do you not want to be known for? What do you always want to avoid? So when we were building this, okay, by the way, this is a plug. Everybody has to also take the money personality test, which Salt made, because it tells you about how do you relate to money. And the reason I'm bringing that up is when we built that test, we went through a lot of heartburn about what kind of data should we ask people about themselves, because we didn't want to. But then if you don't take some basic things, you don't understand their behavior. So when we were designing this gender, the team, because I have a very young team and they're very smart, they didn't just say male, female, other. They actually went ahead and said, which pronouns do you want to use for yourself? Because we wanted to address a young audience. We wanted to address, people who are aware or sensitive. So it was very early in our life. We didn't even have a company. I think we had a company, but when we started to conceptualize it, it was very, very early. But we wanted to be known for how we think about you as a person. So I think those things are important. Because, why? Why should you start thinking early? Because this is the other learning I've had. Knowing startups, having watched the space of startups, that you cannot reverse engineer character. Character has to be built progressively every single day. So this is something that your clients should be aware of, that you should be aware of. Because in startups, there's a peculiar problem. They're very personality driven by the founder's personality. That is what gives them momentum. That is what gives them strength. That is what gives them PR initially. But what happens is that they can, because there's so much riding on them, they can become the single point of failure, right? So I was giving you Twitter example, the child pornography thing. I don't know how many people read about it. But the fact that Twitter probably had the ability to stop it, but they did not until now. It just made brands take themselves off Twitter, etc. So you have to, those are the brands. It's not even small brands, like these are big brands that were calling him out. This is just an important lesson for all of us to remember, all of us as humans to remember, that we make idols out of mud, we celebrate them, we cheerlead them, we say all the good things about them when they are gods, and then this is what we do to them. And this is what we do to people. You have to always remember that I was just telling Munavar that because I was a literature student, this is a very powerful thing for me to realize that what makes you really strong also contains the seeds of your destruction, your flaws, the fatal flaw, the hamartia, as they say. So you have to always be aware of what could take you down and make sure that you know it. If you know it, you'll be able to manage it. Those are my lessons from my career on reputation, and that's it.
Aspects of the presentation, especially for PR professionals like us. But interestingly, you studied journalism as well, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
So how did that happen from journalism to a world of finance?
I've talked about it sometimes, so I hope nobody is to hear it twice. But so I grew up in Bihar, And in Bihar, everybody writes an exam because that's, at least they did, because there was nothing else to do. So my brother was writing the civil services exam, and then he kind of challenged me to say, you write this RBI exam, because I only wanted to live in a city. I had never stepped out of Bihar, so I wanted to live in a big city. So he said, you write this exam, you'll never pass, but if you pass, you'll only live in a city. So I wrote the exam, but my dream was to become a journalist, because I was an English literature student, and it was the normal progression. I also knew about very few jobs, so journalism was a job that I knew, because I used to read the newspaper, and I used to read bylines. So I wanted to be like one of those people. And I was lucky to get into Times of India. They had a journalism school in Delhi, Times Center for Media Studies. So I was lucky to get into that. So I came to Delhi. I finished my journalism program, and I was in Times of India. I just joined. I mean, we actually had a part-time study, part-time work type of situation. And then my RBI result came out, and I went to the editor, because I didn't have my parents didn't have a phone, so I didn't know who to ask. So I took that letter and I went to the editor and I said, what do I do? And yeah, the rest is history. He said, you're very young, you should do different things, you shouldn't tie yourself up. I was 8th on that merit list, because that letter was a merit list. So he said, you'll do very well, you'll become whatever, deputy governor, you go, and if you don't like it, media is open to you, you can come back anytime. That's how it started. Once I got into it, I started to develop, I'm a curious person, so I started to develop more and more curiosity about money, about how it works, economy, and then I stayed a very long time because I was really enjoying myself.
And then I was looking at your profile, and I think you've also worked at PwC, right?
Yeah.
And I may be wrong on this, but if you just connect the dots a bit, when was the time? I mean, you spoke a lot about reputation, and you brought up quite a lot of companies which kind of went up and then came down. So were you around PwC when the entire Satyam thing happened?
It's funny. When Satyam happened, I was actually at Bank of America,
Okay.
And DSP Merrill Lynch, and I had known about it, and obviously all of us read the newspapers and everything. And then I decided, and then PwC made me a job offer. It was an accidental thing. I met one of the partners in a meeting, and he said, would you like to consider working with us? And the reason that and that's a very good question. I actually spoke to very few people about joining PwC. One of them was a mentor of mine at RBI, and she was very, very senior. Obviously, PwC by that time had, I joined in 2010. So it was a few years after, it was a few years after Satyam. I'm a risk taker at heart. That's why I'm doing a startup at this stage of my life. I just like the people, and I make impulsive decisions. So I said, okay, let me do what I can do. The thing that I learned, though, was invaluable. I realized that when organizations, especially large organizations, go through difficulties and challenges, especially challenges that come to them from external loss of reputation, that's the only time they are bold, they make, sort of major decisions, and those are the decisions that actually help them and get them to come out of it. So for me, it was being a part of that solutioning. So for example, I remember when I joined in 2010, 2012, for International Women's Day, Economic Times did some story. And I just spoke to that journalist because she called me and she said, we are talking to, whatever, young partners or whatever. And I spoke to her, and I thought it'll be one of those pages now, which International Women's Day you take out and it falls on the ground and you never pick it up. So I just spoke to her very casually. And then that article was actually the front page article on International Women's Day. And it was the same day when, as it happened, some major banking policy was announced by RBI. So that actually suddenly built my reputation, because even for PwC, being on the front page with the positive news. And then that's when I learned that organization, and then PwC did this big positive news. If I don't know any of you remember, that same year in Christmas, they gave people like a 5-day off, and it was a front page news. So I realized that, there's obviously a risk associated with institutions when they go through this crisis, but especially if they are good institutions, especially if they are institutions that are committed to making it work, they do substantially invest in that process. And being a part of that process actually taught me a lot. So I'm actually grateful that I did it.
So connected to that, I mean, I think you broadly spoke about 3 broad areas: regulatory, legal, and I think ethics, virtue ethics and things like these. So especially in terms of regulation, the way things are moving right now, you said that it's how soon is too soon? I mean, for clients of organizations to realize that this could be something that is approaching, which could probably be a reputation risk, because from an agency perspective, what we most of the time see as a reputation risk, maybe not now, maybe in the future, sometimes, or in most cases, that has to be at least 3x in terms of its severity for the client to realize that, okay, it's really an issue. Okay, so how do we kind of, as agency professionals, how do we kind of cross that chasm in terms of helping the client understand that this is essentially an issue that has to be dealt with it right now? Because they always see that there is a business angle to what agencies are coming to the table with.
No, that is a really, really good question. And it is a question that baffles me, because a lot of what you see going on could have been avoided. But that is where actually you move from the territory of reputation management to leadership. Leadership is not the sum of parts. If everybody is doing everything, somebody is managing my marketing, somebody is managing my balance sheet, somebody is managing my legal and compliance risks, somebody is managing my reputation, the sum of that is not leadership. Leadership is, if I'm sailing the Titanic, I should be able to see the iceberg. Otherwise, it's not leadership, right? I agree with you that a lot of leaders actually are so committed to quarter-on-quarter delivery or their annual financial delivery that some small thing like this on the radar seems like a small thing that can be dealt with by somebody else, or that doesn't need to be paid attention to. But inevitably, unfortunately, it comes back to haunt also. Sometimes it doesn't. I guess people take that risk behavior because sometimes it doesn't. Especially in the startup world, I do find people taking decisions or building products, knowing fully well that this is not something which regulators have ever approved. So just to give you a specific example, right? Like in credit underwriting, RBI is very clear always that it has to be done by people who are licensed. But still there are products that happen. And then when the regulator comes back, then it hurts you, right? So how do you make people understand and see this? Partly by making them more aware. Like you have an organization, it's called reputation management, right? I think people have to start becoming a lot more aware of it, because the business implications of not doing the right thing, not managing your reputation well, are only going to get worse. It's not going to be brushed under the carpet anymore. So I think people will, I think we're going through that transition, and it may be a long transition, but I think it is for all of you to actually make this happen.
Just staying a bit on regulation, I mean, you mentioned Enron. The recent example would be maybe FTX from the Web3 crypto space. I mean, we could see what's happening with the product and where it's leading. So, I mean, what is it that startup founders, and segueing back to the startup space, what is it that the startups or the investors are not seeing? I mean, even if you see your background working with, one of the most celebrated startups in the country, and then the fact that you mentioned what some may call a founder syndrome, that the success and failure or the reputation of the startup is intrinsically linked to the founder. So how do startups deal with something like this? Especially, for example, in your case as well, right now your reputation and your credentials are basically driving the product at this stage. And how do you kind of...
To your question of what do investors see or not see, right? Investors do have a responsibility and an obligation by the very nature of who they are to take the world forward, to push the boundaries of possible, to make it more possible, to do better, to make electric cars today, or to make whatever new things that will happen in the future. As an investor, you cannot keep punting on the existing, and there are investors like that, but I'm talking about the type of investors that you have in mind. So when you see technology that is exciting, when you see technology that is futuristic, you will invest in it, right? When you see business models that are futuristic, when you see business models that address the next billion, I hope that when you see business models that address gender, or things that are going to be relevant in our times, that is their responsibility. So I don't think that that's where they go wrong. If at all these things come back to haunt, it could be because you did not pay enough attention to your previous question. What is the regulatory infrastructure around what you are going to invest in? And is that going to hurt the innovation in a way that will be crippled? So I think that's one thing that does not happen. And the second thing which I think happens is that over-reliance on the founder's personality, because the founder's personality is actually what makes the company successful.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is a bet that they have to take in a calculated way. So I don't think that that's avoidable. That's not avoidable. What can be done, though, is that and a lot of investors actually do, our investors do, is to work with the founders to make sure that they are doing the right things or they're disclosing the right things, etc. So I think that's also part of their responsibility, right?
I think that's all the time that we have.
Yes.
Maybe just one last quick thing with a lot of PR professionals, young people in the room. You also have a background in literature. Do you believe that a lot of writings, maybe postmodern writings in literature, etc., a lot that we see playing out right now, fake news, post-truth, this all was kind of anticipated. So do you believe that people like us should also, humanities as is your field, do you think there are learnings from there which we somehow kind of miss? And that could be a takeaway for us, our homework to study more of that?
Sure. So I think everybody should read more and a wider variety of things, because the world in which we live, the past is not a predictor of the future. So you have to broad base your learning. So that's one lesson that I've also learned as a leader. The second thing is that your teams need to be more inclusive and more diverse. And by that, I just don't mean that you have more women or more whatever certain type of people. They should be more diverse in thinking. They should be more diverse in their educational background. They should even be more diverse in the backgrounds they come from, so that you're able to actually understand what goes on in a village in Uttarakhand when a woman wants to buy whatever wool to make sweaters for her business, right? If you don't know that, if you don't have somebody who can bring that insight to your table, you'll constantly be doing the same thing for the same type of people, and that will kind of deny you business opportunity as well as reputational risk. So the question that you're asking is that, are people who write or who do these research in humanities or literature, are they able to see some of these things? Yeah, of course. If you read science, if you see science fiction, you see how much of what actually happened is kind of anticipated. So there is serendipity in very good authors' life, and they are able to actually somewhere serendipitously come up with some form of truth. That's one part. But the other more important part is that is their life. That's what they do. They research, they study. Serendipity doesn't happen also by serendipity. You have to make it happen sometimes. So I think that is very important. So have more diverse teams, read more variety of things, and definitely pay interest pay attention to humanities subjects also, not just what you're taught in business school or what you're taught in engineering colleges.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We can conclude with that. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.